"Enough of this racket. Get out of here with that baby right now." My husband's angry shout pierced the silence of the night, driving us out into the chill of the changing season. With mornings growing colder and the threat of imminent rain, I felt the sting of desperation claw in my bones. "I'm freezing. If we stay out here, we'll freeze to death," I muttered to myself, clutching our 3-month-old daughter tightly wrapped in her blanket. Despite my relentless knocking, there was no response from inside. Helpless, I hugged my crying child closer, and we stumbled on. Each step felt heavier as exhaustion settled in. "Please let us in," I pleaded with the empty darkness, but the night offered no solace. Wandering aimlessly, I found myself sitting on a bench in the park, my body frozen to the core. Tears flowed freely as the events leading to our plight played out in my mind. How did we end up like this? My name is Olivia, 31 years old. Left orphaned by my parents' divorce in middle school, I was later devastated by my mother's tragic accident 2 years ago. Alone and desperate, Benjamin, a college classmate turned husband, became my anchor. His promises of support and love offered a glimmer of hope in my darkest days. But since learning about my pregnancy, Benjamin's demeanor shifted. His warmth turned to frost, his kindness replaced by indifference. Despite my morning sickness and struggles, his patience wore thin, leaving me to fend for myself. I hoped our daughter's birth would mend our fractured bond, but it only widened the chasm between us. His absence grew pronounced, his anger palpable. Every night echoed with his complaints, his resentment towards our crying baby tearing at my heart. This life, once filled with dreams of a happy family, now felt like a nightmare of loneliness and despair. My husband seemed to have an invisible shield against childcare responsibilities, always deflecting them with claims of being swamped with work. Even on his supposed days off, relaxation at home was a foreign concept to him, opting instead to gallivant around town from dawn till dusk. Left alone to tend to our baby, I found myself drained, both physically and emotionally. Each night, our daughter's cries intensified, mirroring my own mounting distress. One fateful evening, my husband's simmering frustration boiled over. "Get out of this house with that baby right now." His words cut through the air like a blade, leaving me stunned. I can't do that," I stammered, but before I could plead my case, we were cast out into the biting cold, devoid of essentials like keys, wallet, or phone. Helplessness washed over me as I clung to my daughter, wrapping her tightly in a blanket to shield her from the chill. With weary steps, we trudged on until exhaustion forced me to collapse on a park bench, my mind a whirlwind of despair. How had our once promising life devolved into this chaos? As if in response to my silent lament, my daughter's cries pierced the night air once more, a painful reminder of my failure. Just as the cold began to numb my senses, a voice shattered the silence. "Are you okay?" The concern in the stranger's voice momentarily transported me, as if my own mother had reached out from beyond. As I looked up, a woman stood before me, her eyes filled with compassion. "My husband kicked me out because of her baby's crying," I explained, the words heavy with shame. Without hesitation, the stranger extended a lifeline. "Come save my place," she offered, her kindness a beacon of hope in the darkness. As I hesitated, unsure whether to accept her generosity, she gently took my daughter into her arms, instantly calming her restless cries. "It's okay, don't worry. Let's go somewhere warm for the baby's sake." Entering her home felt like stepping into a sanctuary. My daughter was cocooned in a soft blanket, offered a comforting glass of hot milk, and cradled in the stranger's arms, her gentle snores filling the room with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in far too long. I couldn't believe it. No matter how hard I tried, the baby just wouldn't settle. It can be quite a challenge if you're not accustomed to it. As a recent grandmother, I found myself occasionally caring for the little one, perhaps explaining my newfound sensitivity to a baby's cries. Checking on the source of the noise, I found myself face to face with a woman, gentle smile easing the tension in the room. She seemed around the same age as my mother, radiating warmth that instantly put me at ease. "I'm sorry for intruding like this," I murmured, feeling a wave of gratitude for her understanding. "It's okay," she reassured me, her kind eyes reflecting empathy. "We should help each other out in times of need. Do you need a ride home? Do you live nearby?" I hesitated, memories of being cast out still fresh in my mind. "No, I might just get thrown out again," I confessed, my voice faltering. Without missing a beat, she offered her hospitality. Her kindness moved me to tears once more. "Thank you so much," I whispered, introducing myself. "My name is Olivia." As the conversation flowed, A sudden realization dawned on me. Wait a minute, isn't your baby's name Anne? Her nod confirmed my suspicion. Yes, but how did you? It turns out this woman was Jackson, my husband's direct superior. She had sent us a gift when Anne was born, hence her familiarity with our daughter's name. The coincidence caught me off guard, and I regretted airing my grievances about my husband to her. We're always grateful for your help, I said, my mind racing with newfound information. The thing is, my husband has been busy with work lately, and he seems quite tired. Jackson's response stunned me. That can't be right. Your husband has been on parental leave for the past 2 months. My heart skipped a beat as her words sank in. But he says he goes to work every day, I protested, confusion clouding my thoughts. He even said he has work tomorrow. It's a holiday. The office will be closed, Jackson explained, her tone tinged with concern. I wonder what he's up to. I was blindsided by the revelation that my husband, whom I believed was tirelessly working, was actually on vacation. However, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fall into place. I couldn't shake off the sense of anticipation that seemed to linger on the days my husband was supposed to be at work. Ever since I became pregnant, his behavior had taken a noticeable shift, leaving me with a nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. As I pondered how to investigate further, Jackson suggested a bold idea. Why don't you check his social media, she proposed, gesturing towards a computer in the corner of the room. I accepted her offer gratefully and began scrolling through my husband's online presence. What I discovered left me reeling in shock. A trove of photos featuring him and another woman, seemingly inseparable. They look like a couple. That's Ava, Jackson explained, her voice tinged with sympathy. She worked at our company for only 3 months before recently quitting. The pieces fell into place, confirming my worst fears. Though I had harbored suspicions, the reality of my husband's affair hit me harder than I had anticipated. Do you know her address, her contact information? I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. But Jackson hesitated, her concern evident. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have mentioned her name. It's personal information, and I can't disclose it, she replied gently, offering me solace in my moment of vulnerability. As I deflated, Jackson extended her support. I'll do everything I can to help with anything else, she assured me. But my attention was drawn back to the screen, where a series of photos showcased my husband and his mistress living a life of luxury, dining at the prestigious Paris hotel. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. With no income during my maternity leave and our combined savings dwindling, there was no way he could afford such extravagance. No way. This can't be happening, I whispered, my heart heavy with disbelief. With trembling hands, I logged into my bank account online, hoping against hope for a different outcome. But what I found only confirmed my worst fears. My savings of $250,000 vanished. The inheritance I received after my mother's tragic car accident had been cut in half, leaving me stunned and motionless for what felt like an eternity. What's wrong? Jackson's concerned voice broke through my daze. My husband has been using my savings without my permission, I confessed, the betrayal cutting deep. I had reserved those funds for our daughter's future, trusting my husband to keep them safe. But as I reflected on recent events, the pieces began to fall into place. Leaving my debit card with him during my hospitalization for childbirth had been a mistake. He hadn't visited me once during that time, and the first withdrawal from my savings coincided with the day I handed him the card. I had never doubted his integrity, believing he had locked it away securely. I can't forgive him, I murmured, the weight of his deception crushing my spirit. He's been using my beloved mother's inheritance without my permission. Determined to expose his deceit, I accepted Jackson's offer of a digital camera. The next day, we watched from the car as my husband, wearing a self-satisfied smirk, left our house without a second thought for our daughter and me. His carefree demeanor grated against my raw emotions, fueling my resolve. As expected, his car eventually pulled up at the Paris hotel, his mistress in tow. With practiced ease, they strolled into the restaurant, oblivious to the pain they caused. Entrusting our daughter to Jackson's care, I took a seat behind them, steeling myself for the confrontation to come. I've had enough of Olivia's stubbornness, my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. Finally kicked her out last night. Now she's filed for divorce. I'll get the compensation from her mother's accident, and maybe even alimony. You're despicable, Jackson retorted, her disgust palpable. Your wife doesn't even realize you're after her money. You've been using her vulnerability since her mother passed away. but having a child was an unexpected obstacle. The shock of his admission left me speechless, my mind reeling with disbelief. Oblivious to my turmoil, my husband swaggered towards the elevator with his mistress, the key to their hotel room dangling from his fingers. As I stealthily followed them, even though it was just a fleeting moment before the elevator arrived, they embraced and began to kiss. Despite bracing myself, witnessing the affair unfold before my eyes was agonizing. A shiver ran down my spine as my husband's callous words echoed in my ears. "This is a pre-celebration for kicking Olivia out. Let's have a blast today." Unable to find my voice, I watched helplessly as the elevator doors closed, swallowing them up and leaving me behind. Frustration and sadness overwhelmed me, rendering me unable to stand. Collapsing to my knees, I felt a profound shift within me. The grief that had gripped my heart began to morph into a simmering desire for revenge. Betrayal of this magnitude was too cruel to ignore. I couldn't simply let it slide. That evening, timing my return to coincide with my husband's arrival home from work, I made my way back to the house. "Whoa, look who's back," he greeted me with mock surprise. "I'm sorry. I'll do whatever you say from now on. Please let me back in the house," I pleaded, masking my rising anger behind a facade of submission. It was time to tighten the noose around him, to play the part of the obedient wife and bide my time. "Fine. From now on, I'm not giving you any living expenses. Do whatever you want," he declared, his arrogance undiminished. Without a word of dissent and without broaching the subject of divorce, I made it clear that I was onto him. Despite his continued despicable attitude, I remained resolute, laying the groundwork for the vengeance that simmered beneath the surface. Enduring my husband's deceit, I persisted in my search for evidence of his affair, scouring the house for any clue. Among his belongings, I discovered a trove of receipts for hotels and meals tucked away in his suit pockets, but alone, they felt like feeble proof. It wasn't until I delved into social media under the woman's name that her true identity was unveiled 2 weeks later. With all preparations in place, I found myself once again at the infamous Paris hotel. There they were, my husband and his mistress, brazenly indulging in dinner and public displays of affection, just as they had done before. Mustering my resolve, I approached them as they prepared to board the elevator. "What are you doing here?" my husband demanded, his tone defensive. "Why are you here?" "I am obviously here for a work meeting," I countered sharply, seizing the moment to confront him. Quickly disentangling himself from his mistress, my husband looked guilt-ridden, attempting to flee. "That's odd. Today's a day off, isn't it?" I pressed, my voice cutting through the tension. Turning in surprise, he stumbled upon a revelation. "What, Jackson? You're supposed to be on parental leave, right? How come you're working?" Caught off guard by my unexpected presence with his boss, my husband's feeble excuses faltered. Meanwhile, the mistress, identified as Ava, appeared uneasy and uncertain, her gaze fixed downward. Sensing the scrutiny of onlookers, I proposed a change of scenery. "Since we're drawing attention, let's move this to the room you guys booked. Unless you want me to scatter these photos around here. Is that okay?" I brandished the damning evidence, leaving my husband reeling. In a desperate bid to escape, he grabbed my arm and pulled me into the elevator. But Jackson intercepted, apprehending the fleeing mistress and bringing her along. "Why are you with Jackson?" my husband demanded, bewildered by the unexpected turn of events. "Since the day you kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. Jackson heard our daughter crying in the park and invited me in," I explained, seizing the opportunity to expose his hypocrisy. As we entered the room, a tense silence descended, marking the beginning of a confrontation long overdue. Dumping all the evidence onto the table, I watched as shock rippled across their faces. "What are these photos?" my husband stammered, his voice betraying a hint of panic. "I was here the day after you kicked me out of the house. It was shocking, but I took these as evidence of your affair," I explained, my tone steely with resolve. "That's low. That's my line," my husband retorted, his attempt to deflect criticism falling flat in the face of my accusations. His silence spoke volumes, but I pressed on. "I'm aware you used my savings without my consent. That money was a legacy from my mother," I continued, my voice unwavering. "That's our shared property. I don't see an issue with me using it," he countered, his arrogance grating against my sense of injustice. "It's not shared property. It's mine and mine alone," I insisted, refusing to back down. "You will return the $120,000 you used." "Come on, we're married. Let's not get into such tedious matters," he dismissed, his indifference fueling my frustration. Exhausted by his callousness, I reached into my bag and pulled out the divorce papers, slamming them onto the table with finality. I'm fed up with you. Fill out these divorce papers immediately. That's a leap, don't you think? Didn't I hear you say you wanted me to bring up divorce? He protested, his attempt to deflect blame falling on deaf ears. I played a recording of a conversation we had during a previous meal, his hurtful words reverberating throughout the room. Give me a break, not a chance to think. You approached me just for my money. His voice echoed, each syllable a painful reminder of his betrayal. It all became clear after I heard our conversation from that day. That's why you became so cold all of a sudden, I declared, my voice steady despite the turmoil within. There's a lot to the situation. I don't want to hear any excuses or lies, I continued, my resolve unyielding. Pay me $20,000 for the affair, $10,000 for all the times you mistreated me, $120,000 for the money you took from my savings, and $110,000 for child support until our daughter turns 20. That's a total of $260,000 in one lump sum. What mistreatment? He protested, his voice tinged with desperation. But there was no denying the truth of his actions. You kicked me and our daughter out of the house in the middle of the night and didn't provide living expenses, I countered, my voice unwavering. Clearly caught off guard, he attempted to salvage the situation. Just calm down. Let's talk this out, he pleaded, his tone bordering on pathetic. But there was no room for negotiation. Don't mock me, and don't think you're out of this either. I'll be seeking $20,000 in damages from you too, I retorted, my gaze unwavering. Turning to face his mistress, I could see the color drain from her face. I have to pay too, of course. But in return, I'm divorcing him, so you two can be open about your relationship. That should be a relief, right? I remarked, my tone cutting. As the reality of his situation sank in, my husband's desperation reached a fever pitch. Please spare me this one time. I'll be a good husband, I promise, he begged, his tears and snot a sorry sight. But his pitiful display only served to strengthen my resolve. Turning my back on him, I took the house keys and card case from his bag. I sold the house that was in my name. Jackson reported everything to the company, and it seems you're going to be fired, I informed him, my voice devoid of emotion. As we left the room, I knew it was the end of an era. I didn't want to see my husband ever again, so I arranged for a divorce through a lawyer. I reflected, my mind already moving forward. I demanded compensation for the divorce, the money he had squandered, and child support. With his parents furious and his future uncertain, my husband's downfall was complete. Since he couldn't pay all the compensation in one go, his father forced him to work in a mine, I concluded, my voice tinged with finality. Leaving behind the remnants of my old life, my daughter and I embarked on a new journey. We bought a small apartment and started our new life, I recounted, a sense of relief washing over me. The moment we started living here, my daughter's night crying stopped completely. Grateful for Jackson's support and the opportunity for a fresh start, I knew that together, my daughter and I would build a home filled with happiness and love.
Years after falling ill, my wife and daughter returned with intentions to take over my house. But let's go back to the beginning. Initially, I received a diagnosis of advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma, a surprise considering my active lifestyle, healthy diet, and regular doctor's appointments. The oncologist couldn't pinpoint the exact cause, and with slim chances of survival through rigorous therapy, I was determined to fight. Sitting down with my wife of 15 years, Daisy, and our teenage daughter, Luna, I broke the devastating news to them. Reassuring them of my commitment to combat the disease, I couldn't shake worries about the impact on our family dynamics. The doctor had warned that chemotherapy would be debilitating, mentioning that many marriages don't survive such treatments. That night, I shared my concerns with my wife, Daisy, who promised unwavering support through sickness. Financial stability from good insurance, savings, and a trust fund eased concerns about our fully paid-off house and Luna's college education. A week later, chemotherapy began, taxing my strength. Returning home drained and barely able to manage daily tasks, my wife and daughter stepped in, assisting with meals, housework, and transportation to appointments. 2 grueling months passed, and signs of agitation from my family emerged. Reluctance grew when I asked for help. and my daughter stopped responding to simple requests. The breaking point came when, running late for an early chemo appointment, my wife suggested I take an Uber due to her fatigue. Calling an Uber and the hospital for assistance, the driver was kind, ensuring my safe arrival. Grateful but disheartened by relying on strangers, I returned home to a troubling situation. Confronting my wife and daughter about their behavior, I sensed a chilling demeanor. I asked if they considered me a burden, and with a heavy sigh, my wife admitted feeling overwhelmed. My daughter timidly confessed she hadn't expected me to be so needy during my illness. Realizing it was time to discuss potential solutions, we began a difficult conversation. I proposed the idea of hiring a nurse to assist me a few days a week with daily tasks and accompany me to chemotherapy sessions, anticipating the days when I would be too weak to manage on my own. To make things more convenient, I ordered a wheelchair. Thankfully, my wife and daughter agreed to this plan. Seeking recommendations from the hospital, they sent a nurse who struck a balance between sweetness and sternness. She ensured I never missed a chemo appointment, received medication on time, and crafted a comprehensive care plan, including healthy meals. Despite these efforts to ease their burden, my wife and daughter remained discontent. My wife felt threatened, thinking the nurse was replacing her. I suggested that if she took on the responsibilities of driving me to chemo, filling prescriptions, and ensuring I ate and took medication on time, we could part ways with the nurse. Reluctantly agreeing to this compromise, my wife insisted on finding a male nurse, but I explained there were none on the recommended list, and the current nurse had specific experience with cancer patients. I made it clear that the nurse would only be replaced if my wife and daughter were willing to shoulder her responsibilities. Unhappy with this proposal, my wife argued that I should do more for myself instead of making my condition everyone else's problem. I tried to reason with her, explaining the toll chemotherapy took on my body. In a fit of rage, she stormed upstairs, slamming doors. Choosing to ignore her tantrum, I focused on my recovery. That night, I received a call from my mother-in-law, expressing displeasure about bringing another woman into her daughter's house. Though the house was technically in my name, I explained the necessity of the nurse due to the level of assistance I required. I emphasized that the nurse's presence would be temporary, lasting only for the remaining month of chemotherapy, provided the cancer didn't persist or worsen. While she seemed unconvinced, she eventually left me alone. For about a week after that conversation, things seemed relatively normal as my treatment progressed smoothly. Then, on one fateful day, after returning from a chemotherapy session, a moving truck greeted me as I arrived home, my wife and daughter having packed up their belongings and informed me they were going to stay at their mother's place. Deeply hurt and upset, exhaustion held me back from expressing my feelings properly. The timing of my wife's departure, right after my chemo sessions when she knew I'd be utterly spent and unable to communicate effectively, felt cruel. Seeking clarity, I turned to my daughter and asked if this was truly what she wanted. Her response hit me hard. She said she would rather live with her mother because she found it too difficult to live with me. It was a painful moment watching them leave, tears welling up in my eyes. It was precisely what I had feared when my chemo journey began, feeling unwanted and abandoned. In the midst of my emotional turmoil, my brother stepped in with a solution. He noticed the nurse spending extra time with me that day and inquired if I had any family members nearby who could provide support. Though my brother lived 3 hours away and had 2 young children of his own, he generously offered to take time off from work to stay with me until I could find a more permanent arrangement. Upon his arrival, he was furious about what my wife had done, referring to her as selfish and ungrateful. He pointed out that she had never had to work since our marriage, and I had always ensured she lacked nothing. His time off from work was limited, but he had another suggestion. His wife's sister, Kara, was going through a painful divorce and needed a safe place to stay temporarily. Her soon-to-be ex-husband had been the breadwinner, leaving her with limited financial resources. Kara was also studying radiology at a nearby university on scholarship, and my home was conveniently closer to the university campus. making it an ideal solution. Agreeing to the arrangement, I assured my brother that Kara wouldn't have to pay rent since she'd already be putting up with me. My wife and daughter had taken almost everything, leaving only the bed and a few dresses. My brother stayed the rest of the week, and Kara arrived on his last day. He helped her move in, and she expressed her gratitude for letting her stay with me. Kara promised to be considerate, clean up after herself, and assist where needed. In the weeks that followed, things went relatively smoothly. I missed my wife and daughter, but it appeared that I was the only one feeling that way because they didn't even bother to call or check up on me. Kara's presence proved to be a tremendous help. She took care of grocery shopping, handled most of the cleaning, and even assisted with meal preparation. Throughout this time, she never uttered a single complaint. About a month and a half after my wife's departure, I received the news that I was cancer-free, a momentous occasion celebrated by ringing the bell at the hospital. My nurse asked me now that I was essentially cured. My immediate decision was to file for a unilateral divorce, freeing myself from a marriage that had proven unsupportive during my challenging journey. With the divorce proceedings in motion, my focus shifted toward the next crucial step, recovering from cancer. Slowly but surely, I began to regain my strength. My hair grew back, my scars started to heal, and I was putting on weight, while sticking to my healthy meal regime for the most part. I allowed myself some cheat days to savor the favorite meals I had missed during my illness. It's been 6 months since I've been declared cancer-free, and I believe I'm finally ready to move on with my life. I made a call to my old job, and they're willing to rehire me for remote work if I choose to return. I think I'll take them up on the offer because I'm planning to move away. While I have an attachment to my house, there are too many painful memories here. I yearn for a fresh start with something smaller. My wife doesn't know it yet, but I'm planning to give the house to Kara. She came through for me when I was at my lowest, showing immense kindness even though we were practically strangers. She's free to sell it if she wishes. I no longer want anything to do with it, especially if it means my wife or daughter could lay claim to it. My new place is in a quiet neighborhood in the countryside, and I'm eagerly looking forward to this new beginning. Update number 1. Hey wife and daughter. It's been over a year since my initial diagnosis, and I've settled into my new place and neighborhood nicely. There are plenty of friendly folks around here, and I've made friends with my neighbors, including Sophia, who lives across the way. She's a widow who lives alone, with her kids scattered across the country, visiting only during Christmas and her birthday. Sophia invited me to her porch for drinks and conversation, and she shared the heartbreaking story of losing her husband to lung cancer. She emphasized how important life insurance was for her family's financial security. During our conversation, I opened up about what happened with my wife and daughter. Surprisingly, I still hadn't heard a word from them, but I've come to terms with it. I've been spending my time pursuing new hobbies, particularly woodworking, and I'm starting to build up a collection of tools. One day, when I returned from the hardware store, Sophia informed me that she had noticed some people hanging around my house. Fortunately, they didn't do anything harmful or steal anything, but they did approach the door, knock a few times, wander around the house, and eventually waited in their car. Sophia considered calling the sheriff's office, but decided against it, thinking they might be family. I asked her to describe them, and her description matched my wife and daughter. I couldn't fathom how they had found my new residence, as only my brother and his wife knew my current address. It left me wondering why they were looking for me after leaving almost a year ago without looking back. Sophia assured me that if they returned, I shouldn't come out, and she would handle the situation. Frankly, I had no desire to interact with them after they abandoned me. During my lowest point, later that night, I called my brother, who informed me that my wife and daughter had been harassing Kara and her roommate at my old house. Fortunately, Kara had documented proof that the house was now in her name, and she had explained that she had bought it for me, a smart move on her part. I felt bad that Kara had to go through this ordeal because of my family, so I called her directly to apologize. Hopefully, the next time they come around, I can resolve the situation for good. As for my wife, I'm not sure if she's aware of the unilateral divorce. My lawyer sent a copy to her mother's house, but it's possible they mistook it for junk mail. Regardless, I've reached a point where I no longer care. She and I are no more. Update number 2. My wife and daughter showed up at the house again, but this time it was earlier in the day while I was working. I heard the knock and decided to check the security cameras, and sure enough, it was them. My ex-wife looked just as I remembered her, but Luna had grown significantly. She was practically a young woman now. I followed the plans Sophia and I had discussed, staying inside but moving closer to the door to hear them better. Sophia, ever the good neighbor, came over to greet them and introduced herself. My wife asked if she knew a man named Charlie who used to live there. Sophia sounded just as baffled as I was and questioned her use of used to. My wife explained that her husband, not ex-husband, had lived in this house before his recent untimely death following an extended hospital stay. My jaw hit the floor at this revelation because, to my knowledge, there was no record of my death anywhere, especially not at the hospital where I underwent treatment. My wife went on to claim that they were the next of kin, implying that the home was rightfully theirs. Sophia informed them that someone named Charlie did live there for a while, but clarified that he was a divorcee. She also shared that during our time as neighbors, I had informed her that my wife had left me, and I had filed for a unilateral divorce. Sophia added that, as far as she knew, I intended to bequeath all my assets to charity, since I had no other family besides my brother. This was why she found it strange to see 2 women snooping around my house. The conversation fell into an uncomfortable silence before Sophia inquired if they had a death certificate or a will. They replied in the negative. Sophia explained that once they had those documents, they could take them to the county's record office. If they were indeed the rightful owners of the property, they could then get the deed in their name. My wife did not take kindly to this suggestion. She asked Sophia who she thought she was and started screaming, asserting that Sophia had no authority to interfere in her affairs. She also accused Sophia of being nosy and demanded that she mind her own business. Feeling a deep sense of embarrassment, the people in this neighborhood had been nothing but kind to me, and here my ex-wife was making a scene and disturbing their peace. Part of me wanted to go out there and give her a piece of my mind, but I chose to stick with our plan. Sophia, bless her heart, apologized to them and explained that she was merely trying to be helpful. She returned to her own home, and shortly after, my ex-wife and daughter left. After finishing work, I went over to Sophia's place to apologize. She brushed it off, mentioning that while she found my wife's behavior repulsive, she also found the outbursts somewhat amusing. I wished I could agree with her, but I knew my wife could be hot-tempered when upset. If she ever returns, I am determined to confront her and ask her to leave me in peace. She came back again yesterday. I was sitting in my home office when I heard a loud crash. Rushing out to the living room, I found my front window smashed and people were outside screaming. I thought there might be a maniac on the loose, and it turns out I wasn't entirely wrong. It was my ex-wife. She had smashed my window, and my neighbors were out there trying to stop her. Apparently, she had been causing a ruckus for a while, but I hadn't heard it because I had my noise-canceling headphones on while doing some QA work. Frankly, I wouldn't have heard her even if I hadn't paused the music for a break. When I got outside, 2 of my elderly neighbors were doing their best to restrain my ex from causing more damage. Both she and Luna were holding bats, and they had already broken a few of my potted plants. I grabbed her by the arm and asked if she had lost her damn marbles. Needless to say, she was shocked to see me, or rather, shocked to see me alive. I told both her and my daughter to get off my property before I called the cops. Unbeknownst to me, my neighbors had already placed the call. She seemed hurt by my words and asked why I hadn't contacted her after I got better. She insisted that she and Luna would have come back. I told her that when we got married, we made vows to stand by each other in sickness and health, and she broke those vows. I wanted nothing to do with her anymore. She's no longer my wife. I sent the divorce papers months ago. I asked her again to leave. Then she asked about her daughter and mentioned that she's going to college next year and she can't afford the tuition on her own. I replied, "Your daughter was fine with abandoning me too, and I'm ready to give up all my parental rights to you. You should have thought of that before you abandoned me. I don't want anything to do with either of you." After hearing that, she went from upset to angry, calling me selfish and heartless, which I found rather amusing given the circumstances. "You're the last person who should be calling anyone selfish." I screamed back, called her an entitled jerk, and made it clear that I'd ensure she never got a dime from me again. Then she swung at me with a bat just as the cops showed up. They immediately arrested both her and my daughter. They asked if I wanted to press charges, and of course I did. My ex and daughter started crying loudly as they were loaded into the back of the police car, but I felt no sympathy for them. I had everything that happened on camera, including my wife smashing the window, and I had already submitted it to the police. After work, I ordered a new window and cleaned up the glass. Someone will be coming to deal with it tomorrow, but for now, a rigged-up tarp is keeping out the elements. Sophia gave me some buckets to put my plants in until I can replace the pots. Curious about what had brought my ex-wife back, I did some digging. It turns out her mom passed away 2 months ago, and they found out that the house they had been staying in didn't belong to her or her husband. It belonged to his cousin. The cousin decided to kick them out because he wanted to sell it. With both of my ex-wife's parents now gone, she and her daughter sold most of their parents' belongings and had been living in a motel for a while. When they came back to our old home and saw Kara there, they assumed I had died and went snooping around for recordings of my assets and purchases, which is how they found me. Regardless, they're facing charges of vandalism, attempted break-in, and attempted assault. Since Luna is a minor, she's receiving community service, but my ex-wife is facing time behind bars, as this was clearly premeditated. I'm considering obtaining a restraining order as well. At least for now, I won't have to worry